I was really, really excited when you said that you would interview me. I remember early out, I would, think about like, wouldn't it be cool if I could, someday be a guest on the SHAIR podcast? Like, wouldn't that be something? And it looked so far out and it felt so impossible, in those first few weeks that I never really quite forgot that. And then I got to a point where I was like, you know what? I think I could. I think I could be that person.
That was Rebecca Spuller, and this is the SHAIR Podcast.
It's time for the SHAIR Recovery Podcast, where we bring you amazing life-changing success stories from addicts and alcoholics all over the world who share their inspiring journey in recovery. And now, here's your host, O.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the SHAIR Podcast. And today we have Rebecca Spuller joining us on the show. Rebecca is an incredibly active member in the SHAIR Facebook private accountability group. And here's something that I have started to notice a trend in, and is that our members that are in this Facebook group that share their story have some of the most impactful and amazing stories I've had the honor to record and share with the rest of you. Rebecca's story is absolutely heart-wrenching. As I was doing the editing of this episode, I found myself in tears again because there's so many correlations between what she struggled with and what she suffered through. Enormous bouts with depression, suicidal thoughts, taking care of a sick parent, battling horrifically with alcoholism, coming out the other side, hating her job, and then finding the courage and the strength to make the tough choices in order to free herself from the bondage of those golden handcuffs. I related so much to this incredible episode. Guys, again, brace yourself for impact. This is one hell of a story, and I'm so grateful that Rebecca is sharing this with us today. And it just so happened that when we recorded this episode, she was just about to celebrate 1 year. This is a woman with 1 year in recovery and one of the most amazing stories I've heard. So let's dive right into Rebecca's story. But first, a quick message from our sponsor, Organifi. Organifi is an organic superfood supplement that takes 30 seconds to make with no blending, no juicing, and no cleanup. Organifi is a coconut and ashwagandha-infused green juice that is gluten-free, soy-free, dairy-free, vegan, and absolutely delicious. My wife and I drink it every single day. We absolutely love it. We've noticed a significant difference in reduced stress, in improved digestion, improved mental clarity, and it boosts our energy levels. So not only is it organic and upgraded with 11 superfoods, if you order now, you're going to get 20% off your order by using promo code SHAIR, SHAIR. So go to the Organifi website, www.organifi.com. Organifi is spelled ORGANIFI, and make sure to put in your promo code SHAIR, SHAIR, and get 20% off your order today. And guys, a quick reminder to please remember to subscribe to the SHAIR Podcast. If you have an iPhone and you listen on iTunes, make sure to click subscribe when you listen to the show. You're going to get a brand new episode downloaded onto your phone every week with a little reminder that lets you know that the SHAIR Podcast just launched its latest episodes. Plus, it's the best way to rank on iTunes. When you subscribe to a show, it increases your ranking in iTunes. And my goal is to have the SHAIR Podcast as the #1 recovery resource and podcast in iTunes. So please subscribe. And while you're at it, leave us a 5-star rating and review so I can read it on the next episode of the SHAIR Podcast. And speaking of amazing iTunes reviews, I have one here by KFO2000, and the title is Siri. I have been secretly listening to Omar for the last 2 months while working on this whole life change. Although I have yet to achieve a full month of sobriety, I know that I will get there. Omar, your honesty, sincerity, empathy, and most of all, enormous heart is showing me that sobriety is something wonderful to strive for. The other day on the way to work, I was listening to one of your episodes that mentioned God shots. Just as I was turning off your podcast to walk into my office, something strange happened. I must have hit the wrong button on my phone, and that ever-loving Siri came on and said, "I'm happy to be alive today." Now, I must tell you, I have never used Siri in my life. In fact, I thought it was disabled on my phone. If it weren't for you and your amazing guests, I wouldn't have thought twice about that cell phone glitch. I would have chalked it up to some robotic Terminator glitch. Now I see it as it is, a sign from my higher power telling me that this way of living, these days of sobriety, are what it means to be alive. Like that odd voice on my phone reminded me, I truly am happy to be alive today. Without you and your podcast, I really don't think I would be grateful for this life. Now I am. On to day 16 of sobriety, and I know for sure you will be keeping me company today. You rock, You guys are fucking me up, man. Jesus. Between some of my interviews and their stories and these amazing iTunes reviews, I'm just like on the verge of tears all the time. My level of gratitude is already at level 100, and I feel like it's about to 10x. There is a level of fulfillment that comes from doing the SHAIR podcast that can't be explained. And now that I work at Costa Rica Recovery, I am overflowing with gratitude and fulfillment and happiness and joy. And money and acclaim and status have absolutely nothing to do with it. For so many years, I chased money. I chased power. I chased significance on a different level, and it broke me. I always thought that if I could just get to $5 million, I could quit my job and just live the rest of my life going to meetings and doing the podcast. These were my thoughts while I was still in the gambling business, just thinking to myself that once I get here, then I can get that, and it doesn't work like that. It never did. When I left the gambling business, I was broke. And, my wife's been supporting us, as well as some of you amazing members on the SHAIR Podcast group, sending in your donations. But yeah, my wife's been the one that has been supporting us. And man, when you think about gratitude, when you think about what it is to be successful, this is it. I am a living example of what it looks like to be successful, to impact thousands of people's lives, to create real change is unbelievable. And I think what happens is that for so many people that get to this level where I'm at right now, the ego kicks in and you start to take credit and believe your own shit. And there's nothing that's unique about what I talk about or what I share about. I just share my story, and I invite other people to share their truth and share their stories, and we impact thousands of people's lives. That's it. But it's not because I'm some kind of guru or because I need accolades. I am just grateful to be sitting in the passenger seat and watching God perform miracles every single day in my life and in the lives of all these people around me. KFO 2000, you just blew my mind just listening to that and knowing that, when I talk to people about that connection with a higher power, that they have such a hard time connecting and talking about how, I don't know about this whole God thing and, this thing that's higher, greater than me, and I don't know, and it just feels weird and I just can't connect with it and relate with it. And we have these spiritual moments that happen in our lives every single day. And if we dismiss them, then we dismiss these beautiful little miracles that happen in our lives. I'm happy to be alive today. And I'm so grateful to be alive today and to be able to be of service, of maximum service to everyone around me. So, wow, KFO, you sent me on this little mini tear here of gratitude, and I appreciate you. Thank you so much for sharing that amazing story with us. And because I don't know what KFO means, I don't know if you're in the SHAIR Facebook private group, but I hope that you are in the SHAIR Facebook private group, sharing your experience, strength, and hope. What a powerful message you have. 16 days, awesome. Get in there and talk about that. People need to hear about it. And there are now 2,900 people in the SHAIR Facebook private group. We're growing in leaps and bounds. I would say at this point, we are growing. Let me go into the Facebook insights here. Oh my God. We had 245 new members join in the last 28 days. That is just mind-blowing. That means that 8 to 10 new members are joining and every single day. And the love and support and the service that's in that group is unbelievable. So if you're not comfortable with going to meetings, or you love going to meetings, or you have a different recovery program, or for whatever reason you're listening to this message right now and you have not joined the Facebook private group, get in there, go to the Facebook page, go to the search bar, type in SHAIR private group. It'll pop right up. Join. If you need help, ask for it. If you want to give help, get in there and do some service. There's so much love in there. It's impossible to deny the movement that's happening. The SHAIR movement is a real thing, and we are saving lives together. I cannot do this alone. I haven't been doing it alone for a long time. There's hundreds of members in there that are actively participating on a daily basis. We have 4 new admins that are actively participating on a daily basis, lending support, posting new material. It's really all about creating an atmosphere that is fun, safe, appealing, attractive, and accessible. So get in there and join the Facebook private group today. And I got to say, guys, speaking of support and donations, like I was just mentioned, as far as, my wife supporting us and the donations that we're getting from our members continues to increase. I know Darren wanted to hear this. Darren, it's true. Every week we get new members that are donating $5 a month, and we're getting single big donations, 25, 50, 100. We got one for 500. It's unbelievable. Like, the love and support that's happening is keeping this thing moving. Like, when we made this move, my wife was stressed because she was the one supporting the household. And she's been watching the donations coming in. She's like, oh my God, like, it's happening. Like, we made the right decision. Like, this is your calling. This is what you need to be doing. So it's super supportive. It's making a huge difference, a tremendous impact in keeping SHAIR thriving and growing. These mini episodes are making me crazy, just so you know. They're a lot harder than you would think to produce those, right? But I don't care, right? This is part of what I want to do. Provide value for all of you guys that need support, that need help, that face specific challenges in your life. And these little mini episodes make all the difference in the world. So on Thursdays now, we have mini episodes. They're on one topic, specifically on one topic, where you can take action in your recovery and in your life immediately. And I'm getting great feedback and reviews. People love these little mini episodes. So you can count on those every Thursday. And again, if you have the wherewithal to do so and feel comfortable donating $5 a month to the SHAIR Podcast, that's all we need to keep the SHAIR Podcast growing and thriving. And you can find the donate button on the SHAIR Podcast website, www.theshairpodcast.com, spelled SHAIR. Top right corner of the website says donate, or you can click on any of the yellow banners throughout the website that say donate, and donate $5 a month to the SHAIR Podcast today. And in other news, I have recently started working at Costa Rica Recovery as a 12 Steps addiction recovery counselor. And Costa Rica Recovery is a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center. They have been in business now for 11 years here in Costa Rica for English-speaking patients. It is a very affordable drug treatment center as well as a detox center. So if you're going through heroin withdrawals or alcoholic DTs, then you might want to consider checking out what Costa Rica Recovery has to offer. So go to www.costaricarecovery.net so you can get information about the treatment plans and the costs. And then if you have any questions, just email me at o@theshairpodcast.com and we'll set up a call to see if Costa Rica Recovery is the right place for you. Now, a quick message from Transitions Daily and then on to the show. Would you like to join a free, anonymous online group that offers a daily topic email with popular recovery resources accompanied by a secret Facebook group for discussion? Then go to dailyaaemails.com for more information about Transitions Daily. And don't forget to share dailyaaemails.com with friends, in meetings, and with sponsees in recovery. Hey, Rebecca, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to have you on the show today. How you feeling?
I feel great. How about you?
I'm feeling awesome. I've had a really good day. So yeah, I'm ready to do this.
Yep.
So yeah, absolutely. So folks, today we have Rebecca Spuller joining us on the SHAIR Podcast. And in the last 11 months, she's gotten sober, left a 6-figure job to start her own consulting company on her terms, and basically just reinvented her life. For fun and for her own prosperity, she created a blog called My 2.0 Project, where Rebecca has chronicled everything she's been doing since shortly after she got sober. Did I somehow get that right?
Yep, that's right.
All right, cool. All right, so this is exciting because I know you're just about to celebrate an anniversary, aren't we?
I am, yeah. I am, God willing, if everything goes according to the way it has been going, I will have 1 year in less than a week.
Oh my God, that's so exciting. So when's your anniversary date?
June 13th. So I'm currently at 360 days.
That is so awesome. Let me make sure here. Yep. No, that's not on a Friday. So we're all good.
Yeah.
All right. So let's dive right in then, Rebecca. First of all, tell us a little bit about what your normal daily routine looks like, including recovery.
Okay. So as you had mentioned, I recently left my corporate job. I'd been an HR manager, had been in human resources for about 15 years. So this is my daily routine is still a little bit under development. I've only been home for a couple months now. So I wake up pretty early, 5 or 5:30. I don't mind getting up early, and in some of my former jobs, I had to get up really early, for different things. But I don't like having to rush around. So I get up around 5 or 5:30, have a couple cups of coffee with my husband. Usually I eat breakfast and I journal while I eat. One of the books that I haven't had a chance to read yet, but I've heard referenced quite a bit, is called The Artist's Way. And they talk about, just being intentional about setting a timer and writing for 20 minutes longhand every day. So I try to do that every morning while I eat my breakfast. I literally set the timer on my phone and write. And sometimes I run out of things to say, and I start writing haikus just to continue writing, because the way I understand it, again, I haven't read it yet, but the way I understand it is it's just really more of, being intentional about putting pen to paper. I'm a huge list person, so I have a whiteboard in my office. It has one corner that has a list of things that I do every day, which includes journaling, which includes meditation, getting at least 30 minutes of exercise. Recently, I had to add getting a shower to that because I found that I would get so busy throughout the day that at 4 o'clock I'd still be wearing workout clothes or even sweat. So
God bless
my
you.
whiteboard literally says, take a shower every day. And then I have here's what I want to do this week. Here's what I want to get done today. It's usually kind of a mix of work items and maybe stuff that needs done around the house. My alcoholic brain likes looking at my day that way and being able to cross it off my list. And I'll even write down things that I hadn't previously written down, but then I got it accomplished. So I'll write it down just so I can cross it off. So meditation is a big piece of my recovery. I don't go to a lot of meetings anymore. I go maybe once or twice a month. I like, having that face-to-face interaction once in a while, particularly if I'm feeling kind of squirrely.
Right.
But a lot of my recovery comes from, meditating, writing. I've read a lot of great books in the last year, being involved as much as possible on some of the social media and electronic, virtual communities like yours. And so that's really become sort of my recovery. I found that for me, the discovering, my higher power was being able to be quiet enough to listen. And so what I was missing, I think, in a lot of the last few years was having enough balance in my life where I actually could listen. And so I work really carefully to maintain that balance. So I'll work for a few hours in the morning. I get most of my kind of work done in the morning. But I'll, step away every couple hours and maybe do something around the house. I go to the gym most days after lunch because it tends to be the quietest part of the day at the gym. And then I'll come home and work for a couple more hours until my husband gets home, and then kind of try and turn everything off and just, kind of focus on being with my family. So that's kind of really what's been working for me at this point.
That sounds awesome. I mean, really, nothing like some amazing OCD to really keep you like on the beam. Like that's of all the people I've interviewed, especially someone who's not working. You got to be one of the most organized, and I love it. Right? I was taking notes as you were telling. I was like, "Oh, whiteboard." You know, I love whiteboards, right? Because you're looking at it, and it's easy to like add stuff on there or delete or whatever the case may be. I've constantly got lists. I've always got lists with me, pads, right? Like I've always got pads going with me. Like I love that, and I need that. If I don't write it down, it doesn't get done. You know?
Yeah, and I'm the same way. Even, you know, I recently finished my master's degree, and I was always the kind of person that would handwrite notes, and I would, when I would study, I would write, and so that's a really important part of how I process things. And so that's really, really been helpful for me. And, you know, in terms of the OCD thing, you know, I am kind of OCD. It's funny, a few years ago, I took one of those personality tests for some health assessment, right. And it identified me as being a type A personality. And I was, you know, mortified. I was like, I told my husband, like, can you believe that they said that I had a type A personality? And he just busted out laughing because he knew. So I balance that because sometimes I don't get everything done on my list. I mean, I don't meditate every single day. I tend to be a little more lax on the weekends in terms of my writing. Sometimes I just don't get around to doing something. And so I've learned to kind of let that go too, because I don't want to get so, you know, so broiled up about it that it flips the other way.
No, and I hear you. I hear you. And for the most part, there's nothing that I do every single day that's like that. Like I try and be conscious of the fact that praying and meditating makes my day better. Like I start my day off better. One of the routines I have gotten into is I've been doing yoga regularly. That's a game changer. Right. So, which already incorporates some meditative practice when you're doing it. Right. Especially towards the end. But it's so important to not just be scattered around. I think that at least for me, I think it's very important to have these kind of lists and structure and goals and deadlines, you know, to keep me focused. Otherwise, you know, I could sit and watch Netflix for 12 hours straight and be totally fine with that, 100%. You know, and I got a bunch of stuff to do. You know, there's always stuff going on. And, you know, Rebecca is one of our very, very active members in the private Facebook group. If, you know, you guys are listening out there and haven't joined the Facebook group, Rebecca's one of the ones that's in there, and she's constantly giving support and doing service and helping others and just being, you know, someone who's super positive in the group. We've got quite a few people in there now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'll talk about it a little bit, you know, later on. But, you know, part of the reason that I stay so active is because your group in particular played such an important role in my recovery early on. And so I think it's important to, you know, do service in that way.
No, for sure. Now, we've already, we touched a little bit on your daily routine and how you incorporate meditation. Is there anything else that you want to expand? I always ask the question, you know, how do you maintain your spiritual condition, that conscious contact with a higher power? You mentioned that, you know, you pray and meditate. Is there anything you want to expand on that, or is that pretty much what you do?
No, I mean, that's really what I do. You know, like I said, I really try to intentionally, you know, meditate, to listen. What I noticed was that in a lot of ways, you know, my higher power has been kind of knocking me over the head for a long, long time, and looking out for me. And I didn't even realize it. And so I think, you know, creating that space, you know, that mindfulness, and also making sure that, you know, I really protect balance within myself, that's the best way that I can, you know, stay in contact.
Beautiful. I love it. All right, so tell us, Rebecca, how old you were the first time you drank or used drugs, and more importantly, how did they make you feel that first time?
Well, I came from a long line of alcoholics. My mom was an alcoholic, my grandmother, a couple of my brothers. My mom was a big 7 and 7 drinker. And so I know that I probably stole some sips from that here and there, because I recall even at a young age that it was pretty sweet. And I think that was appealing to me. The first time I really remember intentionally drinking alcohol for the purpose of drinking alcohol, I was 13. My mother had planned a surprise birthday party for me. And so she'd asked my brother, who was about 10 years older, to take me out for the day and kind of keep me out of the house. And he gave me beer. So here is my older brother, who I idolized, spending the entire day with me and giving me beer. And so I felt pretty cool and pretty sophisticated. I think I caught a little bit of a buzz, but I didn't, I think I had like maybe a beer or beer and a half. Ironically, that was probably at the point where my mom's alcoholism was the worst, and she was a really sloppy drunk. And so when he brought me back, after that day, and people were there, she got really, really drunk that night. And so what I recall from that day in particular was, that my brother had given me beer, of course, that it was a surprise party, which was great, but that my mom had really embarrassed me because of her behavior. On that day. So that's kind of, how I associate, turning 13, I guess.
Right. Absolutely. So Rebecca, with that being said, you are all warmed up. So it's time for me to turn this show over to you. It's time for you to share your story, the battle against drugs and alcohol, the wreckage it caused in your life when you hit rock bottom, and then finally, your journey into recovery up until today. So Rebecca, please take it away.
Thanks. So after I had that experience when I was 13, and like I said, I don't think that if I had a little bit of a buzz, that was probably about it. The first time that I doubled down really and really drank to excess, I think I was around 14 or so. I had a couple friends over to spend the night, and I recall that we had gotten into my parents' liquor cabinet, which was easy to access and plentiful. And I drank a lot of vodka that night, and I think probably some whiskey. I don't think I was savvy enough to know, the dangers of mixing, a bunch of hard liquors. But
right.
I recall, just being a mess. I threw up all over myself. We were trying to get the clothes in the washer so that we could wash them so that nobody would find out. I think I threw up in the washer, and it was terrible. It was a total nightmare. And that kind of is what my early drinking looked like. I actually kind of flipped, the way I drank in adulthood. But as a teenager in high school and out of high school, I didn't drink really frequently. But when I drank to excess. I always drank until I was throwing up, and until I passed out, until I blacked out. I was the kind of kid that I hung out with older kids a lot. And so if someone, dared me to, try and, keep up with them on shots, then I was the kid that at 15 years old was going to sit down and go 1 for 1 on shots of Everclear with a 19-year-old boy.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that was kind of how I rolled. So that was what my drinking looked like. At some point I started smoking marijuana and doing some acid, some mushrooms. I never really got into anything much harder than that. One of my sister, her first husband was a coke addict, and it was at a point in my life where I was pretty impressionable, and it was a pretty horrible thing to watch her go through. And so for whatever reason, I was really, really afraid of cocaine, and thank God, because I think that I probably would have taken that and run with it, because from what I understand, it goes so well with drinking. But
oh yeah.
But I did smoke a lot of pot and take some acid when I was in high school. My mom got sick. Well, my mother and my grandmother were both diagnosed with cancer my senior year of high school. My grandmother passed away in the fall, and then my mom was pretty sick at that point as well. And all through that time, I was kind of partying, but not every weekend, but pretty pretty consistently.
Right.
the day after my graduation, my high school graduation, I moved out. My dad and I weren't getting along very well. I don't really remember why specifically. I recall that he was not going to come to my high school graduation. My mom was so sick at that point. She, wasn't able to go. But my dad wasn't going to go, and I was pretty upset about that. But I don't remember if it was because we were not getting along or if he just didn't want to go without my mom. He did wind up going, but our relationship was pretty strained. And so the day after I graduated from high school, I moved out. He and I didn't really speak at that point. He didn't let me take anything with me with my clothes. So I moved into this, kind of party house with a bunch of other kids, where all we did was, do stuff that we weren't supposed to be doing. I think maybe 2 people had jobs, and it was kind of a train wreck. But my mom died about a month later on her 52nd birthday. So I went on a 2-week bench.
Yep.
I think for 2 weeks straight, I don't think I had a sober moment. I drank so much. I smoked so much. I did so much acid. I just couldn't cope. And, ironically, my dad and I, we started to repair our relationship after my mom died, which was good. And I did move back in with him for a short period of time while we were trying to secure other housing. We lived in a pretty dicey area of town. We kept getting broken into. So I moved back home for maybe a month while I tried to get up another apartment. So we kind of repaired that relationship. But that was a pretty dark time for me, because of everything that had happened with my mom and because I was, self-medicating to that point. I got pregnant when I was about 20. When I was 20, I didn't drink while I was pregnant with my son, or do any drugs. And then after, he was born, I would, drink occasionally. I would smoke marijuana. His father and I weren't together at that point. So for a while I was a single parent, and I started, getting into some pretty risky behavior after I turned 21. So one incident that I remember, or that I kind of remember, I guess, is my son and I lived in an apartment, and this was way back. My son's in his 20s now, but this was back when you had sort of these chat rooms, and he didn't have super instant, messaging. So there was a little bit of a pause between, messages or whatever. But you had these chat rooms, and I had been on this chat room and started talking to this guy, or these 2 guys that were from England, and they were planning a cross-country trip to the United States, and they were kind of hitting up people that they had met online. And so we, made a plan for them to come through the town that I lived in, which, that's not, crazy enough. But they came, and they were actually really nice guys. They were super, pleasant. They weren't, weird in any way. They didn't make me feel uncomfortable. My dad had kept my son overnight. We had this agreement when my son was very small that I could bring him over and put him to sleep at my dad's house if I came back before he woke up in the morning for him, so he didn't have to deal with diapers or anything like that.
Right.
So I had done that, and we had gone out drinking. And I remember getting to the bar. I remember doing a round of snake bites.
Good Lord. What are snake bites?
Like tequila, lemon, and salt.
Okay. I got you.
Yeah.
I got you. Okay. I got you. I got it. I remember.
That was my signature drink. So I burned out on Everclear when I was 15.
Dude,
so
you're killing me.
tequila was my signature drink. I was going for the gold. So I remember that. I remember buying a bucket of beers. You get those plastic buckets with the bottles of beers. And then I remember kind of trying to walk home. The bar was about a mile away from my apartment. I remember kind of stumbling around in the middle of the street, literally in the middle of the street. I was so drunk I could barely stand. One of the guys, had to keep, kind of holding me up and picking me up. I skinned my knee up really bad. And then the next thing I know, I woke up, it was in the morning, and I was in bed. I don't think anything happened. I'm 99.99% sure nothing happened. But I put myself in a situation where terrible, terrible things could have happened. Here, these guys came from another country. I didn't know them. I don't remember their names. I knew them at the time.
Wow.
But I put myself in a situation where, horrible things could have happened. And, thankfully nothing did happen, but that was kind of, what happened. I had gotten married. My first husband and I, we went out to bars on occasion. We partied. He was not into drugs at all, so I didn't smoke, marijuana or do anything like that anymore. But we would go out and, party, and there's, sort of our home bar, and we spent a lot of time there. And St. Patrick's Day was, the day you take off work because you start at 7 o'clock in the morning, and so that was kind of my 20s. During this time, I had completed my bachelor's degree and was working in my field. And it would oftentimes require me to travel. And so it was great to travel because when I traveled, that meant I got to drink.
Yep.
There was a leadership conference that one company that I worked for had where they would take all of their kind of high potential employees and executives to this college campus for a week and do all these, sort of team building and leadership things. And they had asked me if I wanted to be a facilitator, which was essentially like being a camp counselor for adults. But so the deal was I had to go stay on this college campus. It was during the summer, so there were no classes, but I had to go stay on this college campus for a week to go through facilitator training. And then I would come home for 2 weeks, and then I would go back during the leadership week. And there was of course, there's in a college town, there's a lot of bars. I drank so much during both of those weeks that my ankles swelled up. I came home and my ankles were like, 4 times the size.
Oh, dude.
And I thought it was funny. I was like, wow, look at that. I drank so much that my ankles.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So now that I'm in my
what a badge of honor.
I recognize that was my liver, getting ready to give up on me. And that was another situation where I was, walking around town with a bunch of people that I barely knew, completely unable to make, good decisions. And I did those kinds of things on work trips quite a bit. I loved going on work trips because I could sit at the hotel bar and drink as much as I wanted, and I didn't have to worry about driving, and there was nobody there to judge me. On the rare occasion that I had to go somewhere else to drink, then I would walk back to my hotel by myself. But it would be in the dark in a strange city where no one else knew where I was or what was going on. The fact that I never experienced, ramifications from those choices. I never got a DUI. Those are all yets, right? That we talk about all the time. But the fact that none of those things happened, that I think was my higher power watching out for me.
Absolutely.
So, shocker, my first marriage failed. My husband was actually pretty mentally ill, and when we were in our 20s, that seems like just normal behavior. But as we got into our 30s, it became apparent that it was not normal behavior. We had a daughter together, and of course, I had my son previously. So we split up. And I reconnected with someone that I had known since I was 16. We had been together briefly, for a couple of years, I guess, at one point, but we had kind of gone our separate ways. But we reconnected under really, really absurd circumstances, just like one of those, shot in the dark kind of things where, the moon and stars aligned, across the entire universe, and we ran into each other. And I know for sure that was my higher power at work, because quite frankly, the first time I set eyes on him when I was 16, I knew that he was, the love of my life. And even after we split up, and we had been apart for years, I, constantly thought of him. I had dreams about, reconnecting with him. And I absolutely know that there was something else at work that put us in that place together. when we reconnected. So he's now my husband.
That's awesome.
If that's not a total giveaway, but
that's a happy ending.
Yeah. So, the binges became less frequent. As I moved into my 30s, the binges became less frequent. I still drank. I still usually blacked out from drinking, but it was, pretty rare. And then my husband and I went to a wine tasting class with a couple of friends, and it was just supposed to be one of those fun, double date things where they teach you about different wines, and, you learn how to, smell the wine and, swirl the glass and do all those things. I had never been a wine drinker. I was a beer drinker and a hard liquor drinker. Never really cared for wine, but we did this. And it made me feel cool and sophisticated, just like I felt when I was 13 and had my first beer. And I felt like, well, this is what, grown-ups are supposed to do, after a hard day's work, is they're supposed to have a glass of wine. So I started out having, 1 or 2 glasses of wine a week. And this was over the period of, several years. Then it turned into 3 or 4 glasses a week. I think at some point I found out that, a bottle of wine once opened is really only good for a few days, which just encouraged me to drink it faster. Early on.
So true.
I can recall dumping wine because it had been open in my refrigerator for too long. And I know at the end there's no way. Well, first of all, it would have never made it past, the day after I opened.
Right.
But I would have drank it if it had been sitting there open for 2 weeks in my refrigerator.
Totally.
I wouldn't even batted an eye. So, but over time, then that wine drinking just continued to progress. A couple years ago, I went through a really severe depression. I was drinking at the time pretty heavily, but not as bad as it had got at the very end. But I went through a really severe depression. I was working full time, a pretty stressful job. Human resources, oftentimes comes with a lot of conflict, and I had a lot of responsibilities. I was taking courses towards my master's degree. I was taking care of my dad, who was in his 80s. We had actually bought a house 2 doors down from him so that we could kind of care for him because as he aged, he became, less and less able to care for himself. And
right.
At that point, he was pretty much homebound. And so we took care of, the lawn and his laundry. He could, kind of get around on his own, but he really wasn't, he really shouldn't have been driving. And so I cooked meals and took them down to him, things like that. And the depression kind of just came out of nowhere. And it was so bad that I started kind of having these thoughts of, not being good enough, to being worthless. I felt like I always had somebody standing behind me kind of whispering, terrible things to me. And I started thinking about committing suicide. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, and I don't remember if this is when I started waking up from drinking every night, because that happened a lot too. But I remember waking up in the middle of the night and thinking, you should just take a gun the next time you go out for a run and shoot yourself while you're on trail.
Wow.
And it scared the shit out of me.
Yep.
I mean, it just absolutely terrified me. And so I got a therapist right away. And when I would see her, I had so much emotion and so much hurt, and it was just so much. And I had been holding it for so long because I felt like that was my job, was to hold it all in and keep everything together and be a good employee and be a good wife and be a good mom. That I couldn't even talk to her because she would ask me one question and I would just break down into tears and I just couldn't speak. And at some point she suggested, seeing my doctor and getting put on some sort of a mood stabilizer, Prozac or something like that, to kind of get me through the worst of it. Because she wanted to call my husband, and she was, advocating for residential treatment because she was concerned that I was going to, follow through with my plans.
All right.
I convinced her not to. I did go on Prozac for a period of time. She also recommended that I quit drinking for a couple weeks. She never said maybe you have a drinking problem or anything like that. She, suggested that, alcohol as a, depressant, maybe making things worse, that it certainly wasn't good to drink it while I was taking the medication. But even though she never said that, in the back of my head, I felt like she was challenging me a little bit. So I quit drinking for 2 weeks. Or maybe it was just a little bit short of 2 weeks. It was probably a little short of 2 weeks. But I told her I'd quit drinking for 2 weeks. And then I promptly fired her because I figured, I've got it all under control.
Of course.
The medicine helped. I stayed on that for probably 10 or 11 months, and then I eventually stopped taking it. I think that I've had depression in the past. Probably what I went through after my mom died, was another round of that, just clinical depression. And it was just a really, really bad one. It was extremely dark. I really struggled, even though my husband's great, I really struggled to explain to him, what was going on inside my head. So then last year, my alcohol use just really, escalated. At that point, my dad was completely homebound. We had brought in care to be with him during the day. But before we started that, he was in and out of the hospital a lot. And at one point he was, he had a catheter, but then he wanted the catheter removed. And he really wasn't able to walk much and was not very steady on his feet. And so for probably 3 or 4 months, he would call me in the middle of the night, like 2 times a night, to come down and help him to the bathroom.
Oh, man.
And it was like having another child, a baby.
Yeah.
So here I am taking my master's, working probably 10 or 12 hours a day. And then, getting up at like 2 o'clock in the morning and, 4:30 in the morning to go down to my dad's house and help him to the bathroom. I eventually convinced him to go back to using a catheter, and we did bring in home help, so that somebody could be with him during the day because he kept falling all the time. And that was helpful, but I was still preparing his meals and, doing a lot of stuff for him. And what I realize now is that everything that I did, I was such a martyr. I just kept piling it on, and I had to do everything, and I had to do it just right. But it all had to be done in time for me to be able to start drinking by a certain time in the evening. And so I was kind of terrorizing my family because I was so just so bent on having everything done so that, by 7 o'clock I could sit down and drink. When we grocery shopped on the weekends, it always had to be on Saturday because in the state of Indiana where I live, they don't sell alcohol on Sundays. And there was no way I was going to the grocery store unless I was, filling up my cart with bottles of wine. If we, were going to go out, I wanted to make sure that we were going somewhere that served alcohol. If I was picking up dinner on the way home, the pizza place down the street was right next to a liquor store. And so that was a great excuse to go, pick up another bottle of wine while I was there. So my whole life was just consumed with, drinking and making sure everybody thought that I was really freaking awesome. And inside I was falling apart. I was so miserable. I would wake up every night at like 2:30 in the morning. And I don't know if that was, remnant from my dad, who at that point he didn't need me to come down, but I would wake up and I would just be miserable and I would hate myself for drinking. And I couldn't stop. And I was drinking, towards the end, I was drinking, quite a bit. My dad went into the hospital in October of 2015. And he would go in for, a couple weeks, and then they would have to put him in like a sort of a nursing home rehab unit for a week. And then he would fight with them about going back home because he absolutely would not go into a nursing home. And so this was kind of, every couple months we were doing this. But on Halloween night, my dad was in the hospital. My best friend had a Halloween party, and I got hammered. And I knew that my dad was really sick. I knew that we were getting close to the end. And I still chose to drink anyway. And then my sister called me and said, hey, you probably ought to come down to the hospital, because she had been there with him that evening. And so we went to the hospital. I passed out in the car on the way there. When we got there, I don't really even remember, the first couple hours that I was there. I remember kind of passing out in the chair at the hospital. He was, kind of sleeping. And at some point I kind of came to and sobered up enough that, we slipped out so that I could go home and, grab a couple things and, change clothes, because I was still, dressed from being at the party. And my dad died that morning. So, the last night that he was there, and, granted, he wasn't really lucid until the very end. At the very, very end, he kind of came to. We talked a little bit. I held his hand. But the very last night he was there, I was hammered. Sorry, that's like the first time I really talked about that. So
you got this. You got this.
So, there was a lot of shame. And that's when I really started realizing that there was really an issue. And I was drinking, a couple bottles of wine a night. I was starting to think about, drinking in the morning. I never did, but I thought about it. I was, drinking mixed drinks kind of in between, because I could hide it easily as being non-alcoholic. I was, hiding my drinking a little bit from my husband, so he didn't realize how much I was drinking. He never, ever said anything to me. And, like I said, I continued to maintain a job. I continued to go to school. I did all those things, but I pretty much checked out at like 6 or 7 o'clock every night. So in January of 2016, I got some lab results that were a little scary, some liver enzymes that came back just a little wonky. And, the doctor said, don't worry about it. We'll just kind of keep an eye on it. But it scared me because I knew what it was. And so that's when I started listening to some podcasts. I was commuting about a half an hour in the morning and in the afternoon. So I found your podcast and also Paul's podcast, Recovery Elevator and Sober Guy. And I started listening to those quite a bit. And one day, and the whole time I was, trying to moderate my drinking. I was trying to set rules and try and cut back and do all those things that, alcoholics do. But I couldn't really get together more than a day or two. I would wake up every morning, absolutely resolved. And then, by 6 o'clock that night, I was drinking. But one day I was listening to, it was actually Recovery Elevator. And he's in Montana, as you know. And I had put it on as I was getting in my car, and I wasn't really listening as he was kind of going through the introduction at all. And then when the guest started speaking, I immediately recognized the voice. It was someone that I knew, and I knew exactly who it was. And she lives in Montana, and I stopped it and I rewound it so that I could listen to it. Sure enough, when he went through the introduction and he talked about who she was and what her background was, it was a girl I went to high school with. It was a girl that I was, pretty close friends with in high school. I'd lost touch with her. I think we were Facebook friends, but, I hadn't really spoken to her in 25 years. And it was her, she was telling her story. So I sent her a Facebook message and I said, this is going to sound really weird. But I think I heard you on the Recovery Podcast. And I'm really sorry if I'm kind of being, a creeper about that. That had to have been early June, because she and I then started talking. She was the very first person that I told, that I said out loud to, or, via text, that I had a problem. And she was really a lot of encouragement to me. And then around the same time, I think I sent a message to your Facebook page, like the public page, one drunken night, and I don't know who manages your social media, if it was you or somebody else.
That would be me.
Hey, Rebecca, go to our private group. Here's the private group. Go there.
Yep.
Somebody will help you. So I did that. And then on June 12th, and it was a Sunday night. I remember this. I wrote this big long post. I just went back and read it today, actually. Just because I'd kind of forgotten about it. I was pretty hammered that night too, but I wrote this big long post, and, talked about how I needed to stop drinking, and I knew I needed to go to AA, but I was scared to do it. And I was going to have to tell my husband, not that he didn't know that I think he knew I had a problem, but he never said anything to me about it. We had never discussed it. But my whole issue was, if I was going to start going to AA, then I had to tell my husband, because I couldn't just, up and disappear for, an hour and a half every night. And I got a lot of encouragement, of course, from that group. And I actually just handed my iPad to my husband and asked him to read the post. And I bawled. I just sat there, and I was pretty hammered and very emotional, which was a lot like my mom when she was drinking, actually. And he read it, and he, was wonderful, of course, and basically just asked me what I needed. And I was like, I don't know. I think I need to go to AA. I'm not sure. I went to a substance abuse counselor because I thought maybe I could get out of going to AA if I went to therapy specifically for alcoholism. So I found this substance abuse guy through my company's EAP, and he mostly worked with offenders, that were in the court system, and he did like cognitive behavioral therapy. And he was like, look, you can come to my meetings, but you're going to be there with a bunch of people that don't want to be there, and they're not going to be, the kind of people that it's not going to be helpful to you in that way. He said, you just need to bite the bullet and go to AA. And so I had been kind of studying the AA schedule for quite a while. The last drink that I had was on June 12th. That night when I sent that message on the Facebook page, and I asked my husband to read it, that was the last time I drank. And then the following week, on Monday, a week later, I went to my first AA meeting. I had been at a business meeting on some side of town, and as I was leaving, I recalled that there was an AA meeting somewhere nearby. So I looked it up on my phone, and I drove over there, and I was so nervous, and I was so scared. And I was sitting in my car waiting to get up the nerve to go in, and people are starting to come in. And of course, I had no idea really what to expect. And somebody walked in front of my car and stopped. I was parked kind of in front of the building, stopped and held open the door, saw me sitting in my car, and kind of gestured me to come over. And it was holding the door open. And it was somebody that I knew, somebody that I used to work with. He didn't know who I was. He didn't remember me. I have a really strange ability to remember everybody that I've ever worked with.
Photographic memory, huh?
With faces, yes. And working in HR, for whatever reason, that's just always been my thing. But I knew him immediately, and he didn't know who I was. So, I had this situation where I, against super crazy odds, reconnected with my husband. And then I had this situation where, I heard my friend on a recovery broadcast out of Montana. And then I had this situation where, as I'm trying to get up the courage to go into an AA meeting, someone that I had worked with, that I had respected, was there to hold the door open for me. And so I went in. And I did a lot of AA early out. I went to meetings almost every day while I was working. And I did have a temporary sponsor. I really struggled to find a sponsor. I talked a lot about this on the Facebook group too. I was really struggling to find a sponsor. There's not a ton of women in recovery anyway, not within Alcoholics Anonymous, but I really struggled to find someone that I could connect with, and it was hard for me to reach out in that way. But I did have somebody for a short period of time who ironically used to work with my sister. And this is where it gets really crazy. As if the first kind of coincidences aren't enough. She invited me one day to go to her sponsor's house for sort of a meeting. So it was just several women that were sponsors and sponsees. And she asked me if I wanted to go. And I said, yeah, that, I was trying to put myself out there and trying to get to meet more women in recovery. And so I went with her, and she drove. And as we pulled in, I was like, I think I've been in this house. I'm like, I can't remember if it's this house or the one next door. And we go in, and her sponsor, who was actually the sponsor of 2 or 3 of the women in that meeting, her sponsor was the mother of a guy I used to hang around with. It's actually the guy, I just thought of this. It's the guy that I sat drinking shots of Everclear with.
Oh my God.
Drink him under the table. That guy who I was so sure I was going to drink under the table, his mother was my sponsor's sponsor, and I was sitting in her house for an AA meeting.
Oh my God. Wild. I love it.
I know. So if that's not, somebody knocking on my head.
That's HP, baby.
Right. Absolutely. And I was blown away. I couldn't hardly even pay attention to the meeting because it was just kind of going through my head the whole time. Like, I cannot believe how crazy this is. And as soon as we left, I told my sponsor, I was like, you are not going to believe this. And I'm like, but wait, let me tell you about the other things that happened. And I wrote about it in my journal that night. I went back and found it not too long ago. I was just blown away. So, since then, like I said, I went to a lot of meetings early out. I didn't stay with that sponsor very long. It just wasn't a very good fit for me. I've never gotten a sponsor. I do a lot of things in my recovery that are very, very similar to 12-step programs. The meditation, the prayer, the service work and those things. I just choose to do it in a slightly different way that seems to work well for me. I go to meetings probably once or twice a month now. But I, continue to listen to podcasts and try and stay active on those groups. As a result of, I think you had Mishka Shubaly on a while ago, or a long, long time ago. So I heard him on one of your podcasts. I thought he was really cool. Started researching him, heard him on Rich Roll, and actually he's been on Rich Roll several times. And so now I listen to Rich Roll, every week. And from there, I have learned about so many great books and so many neat things. I've gone mostly vegan at this point. So all of these things were just sort of, one thing on top of the other. And it was really, like I said, it was hearing, my friend on Recovery Elevator and, listening to your podcast and getting support that way that led me to all these other things. So after I quit drinking and started kind of embarking on these things, I kind of called it my 2.0 project because I was kind of rebooting myself. And so I created a blog really just as a sort of a online journal for myself. I don't really have any readers other than, occasional readers if I post a article, out to different groups, but it wasn't really intended for that anyway. My intent was it was a way for me to be creative. I haven't had an opportunity to be creative in my job in a long time, to keep myself accountable. And, hey, if there's people out there who are in their 40s and struggling and feeling like they're stuck and that they can't start over, they can. They can start over. I opened up to my husband about how much I hated my job and how miserable it was making me. And I think that I ignored the fact that it was making me miserable when I was drinking. And I think that not that I blame my drinking on my job, but it certainly made it more palpable, to go to work every day.
Right.
I, could come home and drink. So we figured it out. It was a huge adjustment. I mean, he also works, but it was a big hit to our budget, and it took a long time to get to a place. Thankfully, my dad, was able to leave, money for his family that was helpful. We moved and downsized into a smaller home. and, really, started looking at our budget and our expenses. And so I left my job 2 months ago so that I could start my own, consulting gig and kind of freelance, teach. I finished my master's the same week that I left my job. So
that's awesome.
So hopefully I can, maybe teach a little bit. But right now I'm just really enjoying, getting to know myself. I never was the kind of person that stayed home or worked from home. I've had a full-time job since I was 18. I, worked since I was 15. And not that I don't work now, but I work on my terms. And if I don't feel like working one morning and I want to take my dogs for a walk instead because it's beautiful out, that I can do that, and I can do it without guilt. And it's also allowed, me to connect with my family in ways that I wasn't able to, not only because I had been drinking, but even after I quit drinking. My husband and I were both working so many hours, and we were so busy trying to get everything done, every day, laundry and dinner and, helping with homework and running errands and all this stuff that we really never had time for ourselves. And since I'm, more flexible, I can manage all of the, appointments. And if we have to have a contractor come to the house or a repair service or, I have taken over, a lot of the duties of the home that we used to share because we both worked full time. And that's allowed us more time in the evenings and especially on the weekends. The first few weekends, we were like, we don't even know what to do with our time because everything was done and we were so relaxed. But yeah, so, the whole purpose of the My 2.0 project and putting it online was for myself as an outlet, but also because if someone were really desperate and in a really dark place where they felt like they couldn't start over, I wanted them to know that they could. So I guess that's kind of my story.
It is a hell of a story, Rebecca. Oh my God. It's so amazing that that we're alive, first of all, right? There's so many hiccups along the road. There's so many reasons to drink. There's so many reasons to self-medicate. You know what I mean? Going through what you went through with your dad. I'm one of those people that can obviously empathize with you. My father passed away, cirrhosis of the liver. And it was one of those horrible things where, you have to take care of them until they pass on. Right? And then, the horrible guilt feelings of being drunk, right? The night of where you're just, kicking yourself for it. And, it's just all these life events that go on. And you ask yourself, what's it all worth? Right? So why not keep drinking until you just get to that, bottom, the bottom of all bottoms, where you actually do kind of start to romance the idea of maybe it would be easier to just take a walk and blow my brains out. So fortunately, and this is what's cool about where we're at today and what you're doing, as well, when you, just being part of writing a blog where you're putting down your thoughts, your feelings, your ideas in the My 2.0 project. This is just an avenue or an aspect of recovery that we talk about to all of the newcomers, which is pen to paper, writing these things down, being a part, you talk about being active in the group. You're very active in the group. You're posting in there daily, right? That makes a difference. It not only makes a difference to your recovery, it makes a difference to somebody else's recovery. And that's what this thing is all about. We have opportunities now to be of service and to be in recovery without necessarily going to a meeting. There is, and what we're doing right now, helping people that read this, people that listen to the podcast. It's a lot of recovery going on. It's such a powerful thing, and when you get to a point like yourself, where you can recognize how much you hate your job, when you were talking about that, I was like, oh my God. I hear you. There's so many things that I could relate to in your story, But then when you got to the part about I hate my job, I was like, I remember that. And, fortunately go ahead.
You talked about that on Dopey. I remember. Yeah.
Fucking hated my job, and I don't think I talk about it enough. That I was, I was in the gaming business for a long time, online gambling, and it's just like, how can I be in the online gambling business and I have this recovery podcast, right? I mean, I'm not a gambler, but at the same time, this is not cool. It's almost like, and there's people that work in bars and work in restaurants. It's not a big deal, but it just got to a point where, especially the people that I was dealing with, just the real scum of the earth. And so you get to a point where you have to ask yourself, is this making me happy? Because I sure wasn't. I was miserable and angry, and it was affecting my marriage, affecting my relationships, and affecting my recovery, and I wasn't going to enough meetings, and the list goes on and on and on. And when I talked to my wife about it, and I was like, I just hate this job so much. She said, well, if you need to quit, we'll figure it out. I think I might have jumped on that a little too soon.
But isn't it great that when you have someone in your corner that, can do that for you? And, my husband went through a similar situation, a few years ago. His company got bought, and they offered him a bonus to stay for kind of a month or so to help close things down. And he called me. He's like, I can't do that. And so he just left that day. He left money on the table, and went and delivered pizza for 2 years while he went back to school. And I was in a very similar situation too. I looking back now, I know that, I had started to not be in love with human resources after a couple years ago. I changed jobs pretty quickly a couple times. The straw that broke the camel's back for me was the most recent job that I had taken. I took it, and then 3 weeks later, they announced that they were closing the plant. It was a manufacturing facility. They were going to move the plant overseas. And I didn't know when I took the job. And so it was just terrible to come in and, to make your 10 or 12 hours a day go towards, finding ways to, support a corporation that was putting, 1,000 people or 700 people out of work.
Oh my God.
It just felt dirty.
Disgusting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So of course you drank.
Right.
It's like, here's how I'm coping with this, right? Because this sucks. And these are people's lives. And I think it's so important that we keep that in mind. Yeah, you're right. My wife is amazing, and she's 1,000% in my corner. A lot of it has to do with the podcast too. The podcast over the last 2 years has grown significantly, and it's doing something. And so I'm trying to figure out how to make that a full-time gig. And that's but that takes time, right? There's like a window period, just like going back to school. Right? There's a window period, and you need somebody in your corner that's going to support you. But the most important thing is that I don't go back to the gambling business, and I don't go back to drinking. So, as long as those two check boxes are done, almost anything is possible. So I'm so proud of you. I'm so excited that you're just about to celebrate your 1 year anniversary, and we're doing this podcast. It's been such an honor to watch your recovery blossom in this last year. It's been so cool.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate it. I was really, really excited when you said that you would interview me. I remember early out, I would, think about like, wouldn't it be cool if I could, someday be a guest on the SHAIR podcast? Like, wouldn't that be something? And it looked so far out, and it felt so impossible, in those first few weeks that I never really quite forgot that. And then I got to a point where I was like, you know what? I think I could. I think I could be that person. So when I, reached out to you, I was so excited to hear back from you, and was really, really looking forward to this talk. So.
Well, so was I. First of all, thank you. I love all the accolades, and I love what the SHAIR Podcast has turned into. The Facebook group, 1,000% positive. There's no negativity. Nobody's in there bitching about politics, and griping about bullshit. It's like real stuff, real people, real issues, and just tons of love. The whole purpose of this podcast is real people, real stories about recovery. That's it. That's all it is. Some of the biggest downloads are just regular people because their stories are so amazing and they're so relatable. That's what's so important. That's why I do it. I do it because it's important for people that, like yourself, it's like, man, I don't know, it would be so cool to be on the SHAIR podcast, but I don't know if I'll be able to, that just seems so far off. How about, I wanted to write this book and I didn't think I could do it. And it was just so far off. And you just put anything in front of there. You put anything, you just make that X. I didn't think I could do X, because it just seems so far out there. But it's just like recovery. It's one day at a time, one step at a time. So every day you do a little bit towards whatever your X factor is, and eventually you'll be there. And we're just amazing, powerful testimonies of hope that if you put one foot in front of the other and just don't pick up one day at a time, then you could be on the SHAIR podcast too. I had to throw that in there. So anyway, all right. So Rebecca, really amazing story. Absolutely loved it. So many facets of it that I can relate to. And I'm so glad you joined us today.
Oh, thanks. I'm really happy to be here.
Good. Me too. So we're going to dive now into the closing part of the show, which is for the newcomer. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions about your early recovery. You're going to respond with inspiring answers you can share with our newcomers. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right, let's do this. So, number 1, what was keeping you from getting clean or staying clean when you first got introduced to recovery?
It was really 2 sides of the same coin. First, it was pride. I was convinced that I could, take care of this myself, and that all I had to do was just kind of buckle down. And then when I realized that wasn't really the case, it was shame that kept me out longer. I was embarrassed to admit it. I had a lot of shame. I didn't want to tell anybody. And so I think if I, once I realized I couldn't control it myself, if I had not had that shame, I think I would have gone into recovery sooner.
It's amazing. The ego is not my amigo.
Yeah.
Totally. It's talking to you in your own voice. You can't go in there. What if people see you? I get that all the time, right? You can't save your ass and your face at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's horrible. And the sooner you get to a meeting and you realize that there's everybody else is just like you, the shame goes away.
Yep, that's true.
I love it.
That's true.
All right, so number 2, at what point did you have a spiritual awakening, that aha moment in recovery when you accepted that you were powerless over drugs and alcohol, but for the first time had developed the hope that you could recover?
It was that moment when I was sitting in my sponsor's car after that meeting, where I went back and looked at, the quote unquote coincidences that had led me to that point, and all of the ways that they connected, to my life. I knew, and people can talk about coincidences all they want, but there was no way all those things happened on accident. And I knew that if that was probably the part that I struggled with the most. I didn't come from a very religious background, and so I didn't have a strong faith coming in. But once I was able to recognize that there was very clearly some force that was acting in my best interest when I couldn't, then I knew that I could stay sober.
I love that. It's those beautiful, light bulb moments, those beautiful little light bulb moments, those aha moments where, you're sitting there and it's undeniable that God is present in our life. There's a power greater than us, like something, whether or not you want to call it God or not. But it's, that's why I asked the question, because there's just such beautiful stories where you're sitting there one day and you realize, oh my God, there is something so much greater than me working in my life. And it just kind of gives you that little push, sometimes a really big push in the right direction, because you realize you're not alone.
Yeah.
I love it. All right. So then number 3, do you have a favorite book that you would recommend to our newcomers that you read in early recovery?
I have read so many books, fabulous books I would have never read before. And I've actually, on occasion, I've been kind of doing little reviews on some of the books that I thought might be helpful for people. But one of the books that I read in early recovery that I really loved was Being Sober by Dr. Harry Hiraut. I can't even pronounce his name, Harutunian. He's the clinical director for Betty Ford. It was almost like a primer. So it kind of, in a very easy language, walked you through, the signs and symptoms of what could potentially be alcohol abuse or an alcohol or drug addiction. It explained, what happened if you went into a treatment center. It explained what happened in AA meetings. It dispelled a lot of the mystery of AA meetings and even, kind of helped with some of the vernacular and some of the, kind of sort of catchphrases and things like that. It talked about, what to expect, physically and mentally when you first quit drinking or using drugs. It was really, for me, because control is such an issue, not just for me, but for every alcoholic I've ever met. It was a great way for me to know exactly what I was going to expect to happen. And he just has such a kind way about him. He also is in recovery. He talks about it in his book, and he talks about how he got to where he is. But it's like a trusted friend is walking you through, here's what's happening to your body. Here's what's happening to your brain, your thoughts. Here's what's going to happen if you go into treatment. Here's what you can expect if you walk into an AA meeting. Even something as simple as like, having $1. Just stuff that you don't know until you do it. And so I really found that book to be extremely helpful.
What was the name again?
It's called Being Sober. I don't have the full title in front of me, but it's called Being Sober. It's by Dr. Harry Harutunian.
There it is.
It's not a long book. It's not very long, but it was really a great, great book. And of course, the big book was a great book too. And I don't want to make it sound like that wasn't also equally powerful. What I found interesting about the big book was before I started my recovery, I did download the big book onto my iPad and tried to read it. And it was like reading Greek. Like I was like, I don't even know what this is. I thought maybe I had the wrong version or something because I wasn't ready for it. Later, I, for a while, attended a big book reading group meeting. And then, of course, the language is what the language is, but it absolutely made sense and resonated with me. So that's also a great book. But Being Sober, I thought, was just really phenomenal in the way that he just kind of held your hand and walked you through the process so that it wasn't so scary to take that first step.
Absolutely. Yeah, I found it here. Being Sober, a step-by-step guide to getting through, and living in recovery by Harry Harutunian, I think.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll have that listed on the show notes, folks, for you to click on if you would like. All right. So, Rebecca, what is the best suggestion you have ever received?
This isn't exactly a suggestion, but it kind of is. There was a guy in one of the groups that I was in, and he would always introduce himself this way, and it always resonated with me. He would say, "I'm Brian, and I'm an alcoholic because I drink and we don't." And what that meant to me was, the power of the group, the power of, connecting with other people. So as individuals, we are alcoholics, but as a group, we are people in recovery. And so to me, especially early on, that was a reminder to, continue to reach out, to continue to connect. It was not my go-to to connect with other people in that way. But it reminded me that it was important, Another way to say it, was in meetings, they would always say at the end, keep coming back, and that was something that I just had to do.
I like that. I drink, but we don't. That's the first time I've heard that one. And it took me a second. I'm like, wait a minute.
I know. It took me a second the first time he said it too, and I'm kind of puzzled over it.
Are you still drinking? And then I was like, wait a minute, I get that. Yeah, it all goes back to the one premise, or the same premise, which is we cannot do this alone, right? We have to do this together, right? So I love it. That's a great suggestion. All right, and so if you could give our newcomers only one suggestion, what would that be?
I mean, that's what it is. We can't do it alone. Reach out to anyone. Find someone that you can speak to. There's no way that I was going to get sober by myself. So when I reached out to my friend, and then I reached out to the Facebook group and to you, that's what set off that entire series of events that allowed me to get sober. But, someone is struggling and they're, isolating themselves out of shame or whatever. They just need to reach out to someone.
I love it. Rebecca, amazing suggestions. Thank you again so much for joining us.
Thanks. Oh, I really, really had a great time.
Me too. I'm so glad you made it on the show, and I'm so glad you're about to celebrate 1 year. This is so exciting.
Me too.
All right. So, folks, we've now reached the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say here in Costa Rica, pura vida.
Pura vida.
Thank you for joining us on the SHAIR Recovery Podcast. To check out the show notes page on this interview, or to thank our guests for sharing their story, go to www.theshairpodcast.com. While you're on the website, don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter to stay up to date on the latest news, podcasts, and interviews. Want to be one of our guests and share your story? Then go to our website and click on the Share Your Story button. We share our inspiring recovery stories every Tuesday, so subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher Radio to get your free weekly download. We'll see you then. The opinions shared on this show reflect those of the individual speaker and not of any 12-step fellowship as a whole. And though we discuss